Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. The Watcher, submitted by Kit Kat. When I was 12 years old, my family still had most of the extended peeps over for Christmas dinner. This meant my grandparents on both sides, and my aunt and uncles on my dad's side. All the other people on my mom's side lived far out of state. Anyway, we'd do all our presents with my brother and mother and father in the morning, and then be excited for later when everyone else showed up, because it was like a second Christmas with more giving and sharing. I need to mention that we lived way out in the country. I mean, it's literally a mile to the next nearest neighbor. Total farm country. But we didn't live on a farm. You get what I'm saying. I was playing with my new tape player recording songs off the radio, and my brother was begging me to play laser tag with him. I kept telling him to shut up. My parents were in the kitchen getting the food prepared, so we could eat it too after everyone got there. I had this feeling, though, that someone or something was watching us. I kept looking around our living room and actually went to the front door and looked out at the frozen ground, but there was nothing out there. Oh well, I decided to start playing laser tag and running around the house with my brother, and that prompted my dad to tell us to knock it off or take it outside. So we got dressed up, and thankful that there was no snow on the ground so we didn't have to get that suited up. While we were playing, I got that feeling again, stopped and looked around. There were only like 5 or 6 trees in our yard and nothing but fields all around. I didn't see anything, but told my brother, and he said he felt it too. So we went around the house and then behind the garage, but there was just nothing out there. My grandparents pulled up and we ran over to see them and forgot all about our feelings. And shortly after, everyone else arrived, and we were inside drinking eggnog and just back to being super excited. Our cousins had brought over some of their new gifts, and we showed them all the things that we had. We were just busy having fun. My cousin Stacy stopped looking at some of my new clothes and said, "Who's that?" And she pointed to a window at the front of the house. I said, "Who is who?" and looked to where she was pointing. It was just a blank window. "I swear there was a man standing there just a second ago," she said. My brother and older cousin got up and went to the door next to the window, and then they went out onto the porch. They came back in and said, "There's nobody out there." But Stacy kept saying over and over, "I saw someone, I saw someone." I told her I believed her, and I told her the way that I had felt earlier that day. We went back to talking, and I don't know why I always remember this whenever I tell this story, but she was telling me about this new phone she got for her room, and it had 2 handsets on it so 2 people could talk to friends at the same time. We started laughing about prank calling boys, and I looked up with tears in my eyes from laughter, and that's when I saw the man in the window. He was tall and scraggly looking, long crazy hair, and he had this haunted look in his eyes. I yelled out and kind of fell backward. I happened to be sitting on my rump. When Stacy looked over, she said, "What?" When she turned around, there was no one in the window. My dad came in and asked what was going on. We both started talking at the same time, and he told us to calm down, and then he and my uncle went outside and looked around. They came back in and told us to quit screwing around, despite us telling them what we had been seeing. Dinner time came, and we all sat down in our dining room. We were all back to enjoying the day when my dad saw him. The guy was now in our dining room window, holding a big screwdriver and a knife. My dad didn't say anything, he just kind of stared, and I noticed that he had stopped talking. That's when I looked over, and it was like everything was underwater as the conversation stopped at the table, and everyone turned to look at this guy. His hands were bloody, and he left these red and pink smears on the windows. My dad got up, and my uncle followed, and when my other uncle went to the front door, my dad ran to get his shotgun. The freaky thing is this guy just kept staring at the rest of us. My dad came back from the basement, went out the back door, while my 2 other uncles went out the front, and they confronted the guy. While we were watching, The guy stopped looking at us and began slashing the air with the screwdriver and knife, and he was waving it at my dad and both uncles and yelling at them. My mom finally got the gumption to call the sheriff. And another freaky thing is that none of us yelled or screamed or anything. We all just sat there watching what was going on while my mom was frantically talking to the sheriff's office. It was like a dance outside in the cold. The guy would move towards my dad or one of my uncles. They would get closer, and then the guy would focus on him and back and forth. It was kind of like they knew that my mom had called for help, and they were just keeping this guy occupied. Just before the sheriff got there, we could hear his siren coming. The guy looked up the road, and my uncle rushed him and punched him in the face as my dad and other uncle were right behind, and all three of them knocked him down and got the things out of his hands. The sheriff came roaring up in the driveway and then took control of the situation. And once the guy was handcuffed, he said, "What's that smell of gas?" In the craziness, my dad and uncle didn't notice that the guy had dumped gas all around our house, and alongside the far end, and over to the garage. He had matches in his pockets, too. To wrap this story up, the sheriff took the guy away, and later on we found out he was a homeless guy from a city about 10 miles from us. How he decided to come all the way out to our house, we have no idea. How he got out there, we have no idea. Why he wanted to burn our house down, we never found out. The guy never spoke a word to the authorities. Not one. As far as I knew, he went to jail, and that was that. As scary it was at the time, we did go back to enjoying our day. But now anytime there is a holiday disaster of bad food or whatever, we all say, hey, remember, it could be a lot worse. My Creepiest Holiday Ever by Daniel Y. Around 2 years ago, when I was in first year of high school, my grandpa, uncle, and auntie decided to take my sister and I to Barbados for our holidays. We'd only ever been to Cyprus before, so we were excited about going to a different country. We arrived at the airport around 6 p.m., and it was still daylight out. So when we got the taxi back to the hotel, we decided to go check out the room real quick, and then go down to the pool for an hour or so, and then go for a meal. When we were at the pool, it was very quiet. There were only about 4 or 5 people in the pool. So then we went back inside our rooms to get changed and get ready to go out for a meal. We had already laid our clothes out on our beds so we wouldn't have to rummage through our suitcases. But when we got inside our rooms, all of our suitcases had been zipped up, and the clothes that had been laid out on our beds had been put away. I didn't say anything to anyone about it, as I just thought maybe the maid had come by in to tidy the rooms. It was still weird, though. We returned from our meal that night around 10 or 11. My sister and I sat in the bar watching some movies that the bartender put on for us, and my grandpa, auntie, and uncle were sitting in the lobby talking to some other people that were staying in the hotel. We then got back to our rooms around 1 in the morning, and our suitcases had been opened and thrown about the place. The beds were a mess, and the volume on the TV was all the way up. We could hear it walking down the hall. After we tidied everything up and were getting rested in our beds, my grandpa went downstairs to complain to the manager. The manager apologized and whatnot, and my grandfather came back up to bed. The next morning, we awoke to find that all the windows in the room had been opened, and there were no covers on any of our beds. This creeped us out more than the fact that the door was still locked. We spent the rest of that morning looking for our bed sheets, but they were nowhere to be found. We just couldn't find them. While my grandpa, auntie, and uncle were complaining once again to the manager, my sister and I went down to the pool and we made some new friends. We were talking with them, and this next bit may not seem so believable, but trust me, if you were there, it would have scarred you for life. One of my new friends, Dominic, pointed up to our room window in the hotel and said with short breaths, "Hey, who is that?" My sister and I flung our heads around in the balcony outside of the hotel room to see a man standing on top of the banister, and it was our room. We couldn't see who it was because actually it seemed more like a black shadow than an actual person. It was way too thin to be my grandpa and way too small to be my uncle. We seemed to be the only ones that noticed, as the man jumped from the balcony and fell all the way to the ground. We ran straight into the reception and shouted about what had just happened to my grandpa. Then we ran up to our rooms to find our hotel rooms completely wrecked, even though the door was still locked. And when we looked out the window and down, we didn't see anything or anyone on the ground. No sign of the man we had just seen jump. That was the last thing that happened that was creepy, and nothing happened in our rooms after that. But that was pretty creepy indeed. Not ready for that relationship. Submitted by Mickey 1961. Okay, this was fucked up. I made a huge mistake in my first college choice. I wanted to study a specific subject that only a few places offered, one being a very Christian school. I applied just to see if I could get in with some scholarship money to boot. I grew up a Christian, but was not ready for what I was getting into. A good friend went to another Christian uni, and he liked it a lot, so I thought all the places were the same. I got nearly a full ride for my program, and chose to go to this school after visiting, but they left out a lot of stuff on the tour. When I went to orientation, I found out a bunch of stuff. No unorganized dancing was allowed, guys and girls couldn't be in dorm rooms without the doors open, and opposite-sex guests had to leave the dorms by 11 o'clock every night. I figured, whatever, I'll get through freshman year and get a place off campus later. So about a month or so in, I met a girl and fell for her like a sack of potatoes. She, I'll call her Julie, was astonishingly beautiful. Smart, funny, and, throwing decency to the wind here, she had the body of a slut and the face of an angel. We met at a dining hall with mutual friends and hit it off right away. We spent a lot of time together that fall when not in class, and engaged in the heavy petting whenever we could. No carnal knowledge, but we'd make out and go down on one another. She was totally against bumping uglies. And I was fine with that, just totally blown away that a guy like me was with a girl like her. I was in good shape, and I suppose that's what attracted her to me. She commented on it after seeing me play intramural football with my shirt off. Anyway, to get on with this story. When it came to the holidays, we knew we weren't going to see each other as we lived pretty far away. She was on the other side of New York State. I was from Long Island, and she lived in a town near Lake Erie. Thanksgiving went by, and we just talked on the phone and actually wrote letters. But when winter break came, she asked if I would come meet her family after Christmas. They were staunch Christians, but they had an in-law apartment above their attached garage for when needed. Her grandmother was just about to move in, but hadn't yet. This was 1977, everybody. And I drove my Monza all the way to her house, and right off the bat I was kind of weary when I got there. Her family was very welcoming, but a little too welcoming. She had a brother and a sister, both younger, and no matter the situation, they kept staring at me. Dinner? Staring. Board games? Staring. And the mother, honestly she was a MILF too, was so doting and chatting about how she met my girl's father. I'll call him John. John was an ex-Marine, really big dude. He kept saying how nice it was that I was, quote, part of the family, and that he was, quote, happy his little girl picked a solid guy like me. But every once in a while, I'd feel like I was getting a sideways glance from the dad. I brushed it off and just tried to be friendly. The mom, I'll call Nancy, would repeat how I was such a nice young man and how happy she was that I was there for a few days. That first night, John showed me up to the guest apartment. Even though it was above the attached garage, you had to walk up a staircase on the side of it. It was nice, like a studio apartment. There was a little kitchen, a bathroom, and a phone. The phone will become important quickly. After everyone had gone to bed, I was up reading. I just couldn't sleep. I'm still that way when I'm crashing in a hotel or a new place. There was a tap at the door, and in came Julie. We fooled around, and she said that her family liked me a lot. I noticed that she left the door open a crack, and after we were done, she went back into the house and closed the door, and I remembered that I hadn't called my parents to let them know I had gotten there safe. To this day, I'm sure they knew I was fine, but I always promised my mom that I would let her know where I was. So I picked up the phone and heard voices. They still had a party line phone. And I heard the mother talking to someone saying, "Oh, he's here now. No, he doesn't know the door locks one way. She really likes him." And in the background, I heard John's voice say, "This guy's marrying her whether he likes it or not, or I'll kill him." I couldn't tell if he was joking or not. I was shocked. I set the phone down and went to the door, and it was locked from the outside. I was basically trapped. I mean, what the hell was going on here? I quietly went back to the phone and heard Nancy saying, "He's a good-looking young man. He's sure to be good breeding." Then I must have made a noise because she stopped talking and said she had to go and hung up. I quietly put the phone down, ran back to the bed, put my book on my chest, and played dead. I mean, like less than 3 minutes later, I heard footsteps coming up the stairs and the door opening after a knock. I faked being asleep, and it was John. And he asked me if everything was okay, and I said, "Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I must have just fallen asleep with the lights on." He stared at me for a good long bit and then said, "Okay, good night. Sleep tight, don't let the bed bugs bite." He was completely emotionless. And then he left. I knew I had to get the heck out of here. I wasn't sure what was going on. I was second-guessing myself, but I do know that I was really fucking scared. I tried the door again, but it wouldn't open. So I quietly got my things together and opened a window. I figured if I hung all the way out, it would only be like a 10-foot drop, and I just have to take my chances. I did. Landed in the snow, ran to my good old Monza and fired it up. And as I was pulling away, I saw lights in the house go on, and John come out into the driveway in my rearview mirror. I drove all the way home, only stopping twice for gas and to take a leak. I got home around 8 in the morning and told my parents what had happened, and both of them looked shocked. And then the phone rang. It was Julie. She was crying, and all she said was that she loved me, but I did the right thing, and then she hung up. When I tried calling her back, it just rang and rang and rang. And later that day when I tried again, the phone was disconnected. My parents wanted to call the police, but I said, really, what were we going to tell them? Nothing really happened. Julie didn't come back to school. And again, any time that I tried to call her family phone, it was disconnected. Letters I sent all came back RTS, and I even drove out to her old house later that year on the way to an internship, but it had a for sale sign in the front lawn. Well, I stayed at that college, graduated, met another beautiful woman that I'm still married to after all these years. But whenever I look back, I wonder just what the heck was going on there. Like I said, I grew up as a Christian. I'm not always the best practicer, but I always thank God that I picked up that phone when I did. New Company Christmas Party, submitted by Sydney. I just started working for a new company right before the holidays, and I was kind of navigating my way around things. There were tons of new people, tons of new projects, and it was that exciting but kind of strange feeling about working at a new place. I was the new executive assistant for the vice president, and I really liked it. Everybody was really nice, very helpful, but there were a couple of jackasses in the sales department. I chalked that up to be what it was. I mean, what sales department doesn't have goofballs like that? They weren't mean or creepy, they were just kind of flirtatious and silly. I would just groan at their jokes and keep doing my work, wishing they would leave me alone. The most obnoxious one I'll call Dan, but he ended up being a great friend. The company's holiday party was coming up, and I wasn't sure if I was going to go. I didn't have a date, I wasn't dating anybody, and I didn't want to be super awkward around all these new people, but I also didn't want to disappoint anybody there, especially my bosses, by not showing up. A woman on the sales force, I'll call Janet, kept asking me if I was going to go to the party, and I told her I didn't have a date. She said that she didn't either. We could go together and not feel left out. I was all, sounds good to me. The party was on a Friday evening after work, and Janet said she lived right down the street from the place where the party was, and if I wanted to freshen up at her place, I was more than invited to come over beforehand. Again, sounds good to me. So I followed her in my car to her apartment building. I parked on the street, and then got into the lobby and waited for her. We went up to her place, and once inside, things got odd. She took my coat, and then immediately offered me a drink, and as she walked through her living room, she took off her blouse and said she had to go get a different outfit. I just stood there going, "What?" I said no to the drink, and then she proceeded to walk around in just her underwear and pumps looking for this outfit. She kept pressing me about the drink, but I just smiled and said no thanks. I was worried about the party being awkward already, but this was way more awkward. Finally, she got dressed. I used her bathroom to freshen up, and when she came back out, she had 2 glasses of wine poured and was sipping hers. She shoved the other one into my hand, but again I declined, and I said, "Hey, I promised myself I would only have 2 glasses tonight, one with dinner and then one after." She looked disappointed, but we just chatted about work until it was time to walk down the street to the party. When we got there, she was even weirder. As we walked around talking to people, she kept referring to me as her date, or her gal Sydney, and I decided to skip my promise and actually have a glass of wine. As the party and dinner went on, she did her best to constantly be right by my side, despite some of the younger guys asking me to take a step aside or even ask to dance after dinner. There was karaoke going on, and she signed herself up and whispered, "This one's for you," and then did a really bad job of the song Fever, and all the while looking at me. People noticed right away, and some of them started laughing. I felt like I wanted to crawl through the floor, and I just got up and went to the bathroom. A few seconds later, the door opened up, and in came Janet. Now, mind you, she was about 15 years older than me. She apologized for making me feel uncomfortable. She was just trying to make me laugh, she said. And she actually touched my face, and I could tell that she was leaning in to kiss me. And wonder of all wonders, my phone rang. I took it out of my clutch and stepped away from her. It was a number I didn't recognize, but there was a man's voice on the other end that said, "Hey, I can't hear you. Where'd you go? Can you come back out here?" It didn't make any sense to me, but it got me out of the bathroom and back to the table that we were sitting at. I sat down trying to make the best of things and not blow things up in front of all these coworkers. Janet sat down with 2 glasses of wine and handed me one with a smile. I'm not going to lie, I really wanted one, but Dan, who was a little older than me too, came over and said something to Janet, and then she said, "Oh, sure, where is he?" Dan pointed to another salesperson, and she said, "Hey, Sid, excuse me, I'll be right back." She got up and walked away, and Dan said, "Hey, let's go do some karaoke." And he was laughing, and I laughed too, and I got up. He paused for a second as I walked over to the sign-up table, but when I turned around, he just kind of hopped over to me. We sang a very off-key version of Miranda Lambert's Little Red Wagon song, and laughed all the way through it. When we finished, everyone clapped, and Dan's fiancée came over, and Dan introduced her. I immediately thought that was weird too, but there was a reason for all of this. As we talked, I noticed Janet drinking her wine, talking to this guy named Ronnie from sales, but she kept staring at me. When we all sat back down, about 10 minutes later, Janet started to say that she didn't feel well. She was basically passing out, and everyone assumed she was just getting hammered. 2 of our coworkers said they would take her home as they knew where she lived, and all 3 of them left. Well, Ronnie and Jeff saw something that I hadn't. Janet had put something in my wine glass before she sat down and offered it to me. I was almost roofied. When we were getting up to sing, Dan switched the glasses while Janet walked away as Ronnie distracted her. Dan told his fiancée what was going on, and she said, "Hey, just go take care of business." Pretty sure I know what would have happened if someone else didn't step in. So, Janet went home and passed out the minute she got there, and I thanked the guys for saving me. I asked them that they not tell anybody about this, as I didn't want to get her into any trouble, and I would just tell her that I wasn't interested in anything that she wanted to do with me, but if she did continue to make advances, I'd go to HR. The best Christmas gift? She had been applying for other jobs, and after I confronted her, told her when I knew what she had tried to do, she just kind of looked at me, turned away, and took a job someplace else, and started right after the new year. Just goes to show you, sometimes the people you really need to trust might be the ones that you think are the annoying goofballs, and the ones that you make the mistake of trusting are really the scariest people. Strange Happenings by Fairy-like. We had a busy holiday last year. Well, I did, but it did not come without incidents. It started with my old Jack-in-the-Box. It's old, circa 1978, even though I wasn't born until 1981, but it was in good condition. It used to be a toy that my mom kept at my grandparents' house to play with whenever we would visit, so she wouldn't have to drag toys around with us everywhere. I have it now that my pap-pap passed away, and my grandmother lives with my aunt. The first incident in a series of incidents that my mother, aunt, cousin, and I believed to be pap-pap started around the week before Christmas, and it involved the Jack-in-the-Box. Coincidentally, pap-pap's name is Jack. I had the toy sitting on my dresser, and a wooden box of miniature rubber bands on top of it. This wooden box is small, but not very light. That night, I heard shuffling on my dresser, and I just ignored it and went to sleep. When I woke up, I was startled to see the Jack-in-the-Box out of the box, its clown face smiling blankly at me and giving me a good spook. The first thing that came to mind was Pap-Pap and what a prankster he always was. But what really made me think it was him is when I found the box of rubber bands sitting next to me on the nightstand. Not only how did they get over by me, how did the Jack-in-the-Box come out of the box without the music waking me up? Granted, if it popped up on its own, I could probably sleep through that. But the box of rubber bands being moved from my dresser to the bedstand? I really think it was him. The next incident was when I was putting up my Christmas tree. The set of lights I used started blinking. The strand of lights were in perfect working order, and did not have the blinkers on in place to make them blink. But for some reason, they just started blinking. When we got to my aunt's house, she said that Pap-Pap had popped in for a visit, and when we asked what had happened, she told us that her lights did the same thing as mine. They just started blinking for no apparent reason. Grandma said that the blinking lights were Pap's favorite, so we really think he was just popping in to wish us a Merry Christmas. The spookiest holiday haunt, though, happened while I was driving the 3.5 hours back from my aunt's house, and on the night before Christmas Eve. We got a call from my dad on his cell phone asking if we had heard from my brother Eric, because he hadn't seen or heard from him all day. It was around 10 p.m. at this point, and I do have to say, my dad has the tendency to forget when we would tell him where we were going to be. But we hadn't heard from Eric, and knowing that Eric is a pretty reasonable kid, especially when it comes to letting everybody know where he was, we began freaking out a little and repeatedly calling Eric's cell phone. There was no answer. Mom called Eric's friend David, and he hadn't heard from him either. So then we called my brother-in-law AJ. He had no idea and was just leaving for work. So I told my mom to just keep blowing up Eric's phone with phone calls so he knew it was urgent. And on about the 5th call, this robotic voice answered, "Hello?" Mom asked Eric, because the voice sounded so weird. And she said the voice said, "He isn't answering, asshole." and then the line went dead. My mom and I talked about it for about 20 minutes, and at first I was asking if she had the right number, but when I checked, she did. We were talking about how weird this was, and maybe Eric was in real trouble somewhere. Maybe someone stole his phone. Just when we were at the peak of our awful thoughts of what terrible things might have happened, Eric called from his girlfriend's phone. He had gone to the movies, and Dad forgot about that. He was fine, but get this. He left his phone on his bed in our house. Nobody was there to answer his phone. There's always been a somewhat sinister feeling in his room, and nothing harmful, just like maybe a grumpy person. I have a few more encounters during the holiday season, but those tales will come at another time. My Scary Christmas by J. Lee. It was Christmas Eve, and I was a freshman in high school. My family had been split up for some time, so normally we trade off Christmas Day and Christmas Eve every year. This year, I come home early from my grandparents' Christmas party while everyone else was at my aunt and uncle's celebrating at another party. When I was dropped off, my cousins offered to stay with me for a few hours, and I declined. I thought I could watch some of my new DVDs and get some alone time in the house, which was a rarity. I did notice an unfamiliar car park on the street, but I didn't think anything of it considering it was Christmas Eve. Probably a neighbor's relative or something. Once I got inside, I locked the door, grabbed some snacks, and started to settle down. I hadn't been home for more than 15 minutes when there was a knock at the door. So I unlocked it and opened it only a crack to see a man standing there. Dark hair, glasses, slightly overweight, and dressed casually. He didn't look like much of a threat, but my stomach still dropped. That's when he asked, "I was wondering about the car outside. Is it for sale?" I told him I didn't think so. And he said, "Well, is there someone here I can talk to about it?" And I said, quite stupidly I might add, "No, but you could come back another time." And I shut the door and turned the lock as fast as I could. He immediately reached for the handle and started pounding on the door, and I heard a string of profanities, but then the pounding stopped. Terrified, I was crawling on the floor to the phone, hoping he wouldn't be able to see me through one of the windows. Then I heard some other noises on the other side of the house. Our house had an open garage door, and it led through to the laundry room. The door lock was broken back there. No one had bothered to fix it. But suddenly, I heard a man yell, and then I saw the man through the window running to his car. He jumped in and drove off. My uncle had gotten home just in time and scared the man off. Who knows what would have happened if he hadn't made it home in time. Sadly, we didn't get a plate number, and nothing ever came of it. But I will never stay home alone on a holiday again. Skating on the Creek, submitted by They'll Always Be the Whalers to Me. I grew up in Connecticut. Up here, we learned to skate early and play hockey right after. I started skating when I was 2.5 years old. My family lived on a creek that would freeze right just behind our house, and ever since I can remember, my dad would go out and clear off the snow when it would freeze in the winter and set up our PVC goals, and everybody else in the neighborhood would come down to skate. All the kids and some of the adults would also play pickup pond hockey, or more to the point, creek hockey. Sometimes my dad would even snake a hose all the way down through our yard and hit the ice with some warm water, and then squeegee it around to make it smoother. He was a one-man Zamboni. I should say that my dad was an ex-WHL player who never really made it, but he was the best skater I've ever known, and I've known a lot. He's 76 years old now, and he still plays. In the early 90s, I was only playing for my high school, but when you've got the bug, you want to play all the time. The stink of your pads never comes off because every time they dry, you just go back out to play. And it got to the point that my mom bought me and my brother 2 sets of gear so we could have one for games and one for our pickup stuff at home. Okay, that's a lot of backstory. But I'll say this. No, I never made it. I played D1, had a cup of coffee in the ECHL, but I blew out my ACL, and that was as far as my NHL dreams ever went. This story took place back in 1991. That year, I'd gotten a new pair of Microns for my creek hockey love, as I didn't want to use my tax for that. As a rambunctious 16-year-old with an older brother home from college, I was egging him on to go out the night after Christmas to skate around and have some fun, just the two of us. The creek was normally about 8 feet deep at the middle part, but the ice would be wicked thick, more than a foot. There was never an issue before this night. But this night, something happened that I can't ever figure out even now how it happened. We were just skating around and passing a puck, and we stopped for a minute to have a plug of Levi Garrett, our choice of chew at the time. While we stood there talking, we heard a deep thump sound. I looked at Brad, and in the light of just the snow keeping things lit, I could see his concern on his face. I looked down and saw a crack right beneath us. Before we could say anything, there was another crunch, and I started slowly skating backwards. Next thing we knew, crack. Brad shot down as the ice broke up. He disappeared, and I yelled out. A few seconds later, he popped up wheezing and was grabbing at the ice that just kept breaking despite it being so thick. I started yelling, "Brad! Brad!" and then, "Dad! Dad!" Fuck, someone help us. Brad looked at me and said so calmly, I'll never forget it. "Dude, lay down and just pass me your stick." I idolized my older brother, and I immediately did what he said. He held onto my stick, and it seemed like in no time, I felt hands on my ankles pulling me backwards. It was painful, but I heard my dad saying, "Hold on, you guys, hold on." No yelling, totally calm. Slowly, my brother came out of the water, and the ice wasn't breaking anymore. My legs and arms were on fire, but I knew my brother was in worse shape. My dad kept pulling me, and when he felt it was safe, he told my mom, who had come out, to just throw a blanket over my brother. We got Brad on his feet and walked him back to the house, and we all worked to get him out of his gear. He was shivering a ton, and I was trying to make him laugh by telling him that I had never seen such a small dick once in my life. My mom called a doctor friend who lived up the street, and he came down to check on him. Thank God he didn't have hypothermia, but we kept Brad in a blanket and warmed him up on his own. He was okay, but what a Christmas holiday that was. I'll never forget the look of terror on his face when he came out of that water, and the thought that if he hadn't come back up, there was no way I would have been able to help him. I'll never use Marketplace again. Submitted by Jenna O. This literally happened last week. My hubby and I screwed up thinking one of us ordered the new PS5 for our two sons, when, in reality, we hadn't. I blamed him, he blamed me. We both thought we had it covered. But rather than fight about it, I just went on to Marketplace on Facebook and looked to see how badly I was going to be gouged. After seeing people asking for like $1,200 or $1,500, I got discouraged until I saw one that said $700 or best offer. There were a shit ton of comments, but I took a chance and PM'd the guy, and he got back to me pretty quick. Now, I'm not being arrogant, but I'm a fitness instructor and in very good shape, and I like to think I'm pretty. Please don't flame me in the comments. My Facebook picture is me leading a class, and my avatar is just my face. So I explained my situation. I offered him $800, which is all I could afford. About an hour later, he PM'd me back and said, okay, he knows it was Christmas. I made arrangements to meet him in the parking lot of a police/fire hall parking lot. It was pretty nearby, and he agreed. It was already about 7 p.m. and dark out, so I asked my husband to go and get it. He left, and after about a half hour, I started to wonder where he was. The place wasn't that far away, and he should have been back. Then I figured maybe he stopped for gas or went to the store. And that's when my phone rang. It was my hubby, completely out of breath and really worked up. And for good reason. 2 things right now. The place I sent him was no longer a police station. It was just a volunteer fire company hall. And second, the guy who he was meeting thought it was going to be me that was meeting him. When my hubby got there, the guy looked really angry but said okay and handed my husband the PS5 box. My never-trusting hubby said he wanted to check it out before handing over the cash, and as he was opening the box, the guy pulled out a handgun and pointed it at my hubby and said, "Give me the fucking money." My hubby took out the cash and handed it over to him, and then the guy smashed my hubby on the side of his head. The guy jumped into his car, and my hubby was obviously dazed, but he got part of the out-of-town plate and make of the guy's car. As the guy took off, my hubby called 911, and in a few minutes 2 cars showed up with an ambulance on the way. After hearing his story, they got the message out on this guy. The old line my cousin used to always say, who happened to be a cop, came into play that night. You can outrun a cop, but you can't outrun his radio. EMTs checked out my hubby, and he had a pretty good cut above his ear, but he was going to be okay, and the guy got caught less than 4 miles away. In the box was an old PS2 and just a bunch of junk. But when the cops searched the guy's car, they found a shopping bag with duct tape, a ball gag, and a box of unopened condoms. This guy had more than robbing someone on his mind. He's in jail right now, an out-of-towner that can't make bail. So until this whole thing continues to unravel, he's not getting out anytime soon. My hubby is okay, and we got our money back, and we promised our sons we'd get them a PS5 as soon as they became more available and more affordable. I'm just glad my hubby is okay, but I'll never use Marketplace again. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories, special holiday edition. Sorry it was a little late, but I wanted to re-record. You can actually hear my sinuses kicking back up right now, and I hate recording like that. So I apologize. I hope you're all having great holidays if you're celebrating anything, and I am really excited about 2021 and what it will bring for all of us. Hopefully we can just start forgetting about 2020. If you've got a true scary story that you would like to hear narrated on my channel, email unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. Please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. And of course, follow me on social media. All the links for that are in the description below. Everybody, be safe this holiday season. Wear your mask, wash your hands, social distance. And remember, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.